I honestly didn't think I'd be talking about Highguard again so soon, but a lot has happened since the first Unpacked video I made on the game just 2 weeks ago. Obviously, the big story is that Wildlight Entertainment has laid off the majority of its staff, leaving just a skeleton crew of directors, I'm told by a source with knowledge of the situation, to see if they can turn things around for Highguard. Unfortunately, the negative press around the game keeps stacking up, and I think that ship has sailed at this point. In my previous video, I took the studio at its word that they didn't need a massive number of players to keep the lights on because of their independence and funding, which, at the time, wasn't disclosed. Clearly, that wasn't the case, and just this week, Steven Totilo reported that funding for Wildlight Entertainment actually came from Tencent. With that allegedly being the case, then it's no surprise that the studio has shuttered as quickly as it has, considering the amount of investment it would take from Tencent to try and turn things around at this point. A lot of people are arguing over the semantics of Wildlight Entertainment being an independent studio with funding from Tencent, but it really doesn't matter. That's money they were going to have to pay back, and despite what the studio leadership was saying publicly, they were going to need to sell a hell of a lot of microtransactions to make that happen, and that requires a big player base. I maintained that I was digging Highguard the more I played it, especially after the 5v5 update. In my original video, I listed a number of things I thought Wildlight could improve upon, but I generally liked the core concept of the game. That said, I also maintain that Wildlight Entertainment really just didn't read the room on Highguard. The graveyard of games that have tried and failed to enter the competitive shooter market isn't a small one. Just in the last couple years we've seen Hyperscape, Spectre Divide, X-Defiant, Concord, and now Highguard. And those are just the ones that have actually launched and then subsequently shut down. I've covered numerous times just how many cancelled live service games Ubisoft alone is reported to have had. A rhetorical question I'm constantly asking is, what is going to make this one work? A question that Wildlight Entertainment unfortunately seems to have severely misjudged in the current games market. The comments on my previous Unpacked rightfully pointed out this statement made by Dusty Welch, the CEO of Wildlight, is being out of touch when asked about why the studio is making Highguard.
But ultimately, when you look, kind of top-down, 30,000-foot view in the shooter space, shooters are still the rocket fuel that is propelling the games business, both MAU, monthly active users, in playtime and in revenue. The CAGRs are really positive and strong and continuing to grow. 5 of the top 10 games on PC are shooters by MAU, and so we can go on and on with stats.
Oh yeah.
But still, there's an undercurrent of sentiment and some disregard.
What Wildlight's leadership seems to have overlooked about that stat, though, is that games that are succeeding in the FPS space, if they're not from a major, well-known developer, publisher, or IP, aren't the hero shooters. Ironically, they're the less visually distinct mid-core and hardcore FPS games. Ready or Not has sold 10 million copies, Hell Let Loose sold 5 million, Squad has sold 7 million, and Armor Reforger has been steadily growing. And that's just to name some of the bigger ones, but even smaller indie FPS titles have sold very well too. Just look at the Steam review counts of Ground Branch, Zero Hour, Body Cam, the World War I series, and I could keep going from there. Look at the positive reactions to upcoming titles like War Dogs from Bulkhead Interactive, Hell Let Loose Vietnam, or Project Bellum. All highly anticipated releases in the FPS market, none of them hero shooters. The only hero shooters I can think of that have even broken through in recent times are Deadlock and Marvel Rivals, both of which fall into the categories I pointed out earlier, being made by a major developer and featuring a major IP. There's looking at the data of what people are playing, and then there's being in tune with what the online community is telling you they want to play. For nearly every recent reveal of sci-fi fantasy hero shooters, the reaction has been overwhelmingly negative or meh at best. To ignore that as a developer, when there are so many examples to pull from, is putting your head in the sand at this point. One of the game's technical directors, Josh Sobel, made a lengthy post about their thoughts on the reveal, release, and aftermath of Wildlight Entertainment. I won't recap the whole post for you, but the too long didn't read of it is that Sobel talked about how the pre-launch feedback for Highguard was very positive, from both internal and external sources. There was a lot of excitement at the studio, and then the Game Awards reveal happened and it all went downhill from that point on. Sobel lamented that the game wasn't even given a chance, and that gamer culture played a role in the game failing out of the gate. We were turned into a joke from minute one, largely due to false assumptions about $1 million ad placement, which even prominent journalists soon began to state as fact. Within minutes, it was decided this game was dead on arrival, and creators now had free rage bait content for a month. Later in the post, Sobel said, "I'm not saying our failure is purely the fault of gamer culture and that the game would have thrived without the negative discourse, but it absolutely played a role. All products are at the whims of the consumers, and the consumers put absurd amounts of effort into slandering Highguard, and it worked." While I empathize with Sobel and I'm frustrated to see the amount of hate directed their way to the point of them just leaving social media altogether, I also think the post is quite revealing about the bubble the studio found itself in. Maybe a bit ironically, Twitter is the last place I would have made that post, knowing that the drama merchants were already circling the waters for blood. That said, I don't think a game's fate is determined by drama merchants looking to make a buck off spreading bullshit on the internet. I do think they can contribute to the online presence of a game, generate a lot of nastiness towards developers, and of course cause a lot of stress and anger for the people being targeted. But the vast majority of consumers aren't paying close attention to the online drama. If they were, Call of Duty would have died ages ago. Highguard was entering a crowded space with a hype boost from the Game Awards, and everyone's first impression of the game was its poor reveal trailer. There was no dedicated community waiting for the game to arrive. One of their big marketing beats was that Highguard was from the devs that brought you Apex Legends, which might be enticing to investors, but to actual players, that doesn't mean a whole lot these days. Wildlight tried to recreate the success of Apex Legends Shadow Drop, and unfortunately we're many years behind multiple trends. I think Sobel is unfortunately discounting the fact that Highguard had over 100,000 people trying it on day one. That's a hell of a lot more than the vast majority of developers could ever dream of having to play their game at launch. But unfortunately for Wildlight, they weren't able to convince people their game was worth playing over its competition. Sobel's post was personal and understandably bitter, and Wildlight's situation is a sad one. But ultimately, it's your job to convince people to play your game. I unfortunately think Wildlight was a bit high on their own supply in this case. Look, if you're gonna try to make a hero shooter, at least bring back Shadowrun. I'll be there day one for you.